Imagine growing up in a home where violence wasn't just an occasional incident, but a way of life, where the very walls echoed with screams and the shadows held dark secrets. Now imagine that child growing up to become one of the most notorious murderers of the 20th century. This is the story of Peter Kürten, a man who earned the chilling nickname, the Vampire of Düsseldorf. But before he became a name that struck terror across Germany, he was just a boy shaped and scarred by a childhood straight out of a nightmare. Peter Kürten was born on May 26, 1883, in Mülheim am Rhein, a small district of Cologne in Germany. The Kürten household was, well, let's just say it was no place for a child. Poverty was a constant companion, but it wasn't just financial struggles that marked Peter's upbringing. His family, if you can even call it that, was plagued by violence, neglect, and unspeakable abuse. Peter was the third of 13 children. Yes, 13. Packed into a tiny, overcrowded apartment, the Kürten children lived in conditions that most of us would struggle to imagine. Basic necessities like food and clothing were luxuries. And if that wasn't bad enough, Peter's father was an abusive alcoholic who ruled the household with an iron fist. Unfortunately for Peter and his family, it was often a clenched one. This was a childhood where every waking moment was filled with fear. The screams of siblings, the sobs of a mother, the drunken tirades of a father who seemed to relish causing pain. For Peter, this was normal. It was all he knew. To understand Peter's early years, you have to understand his father. The elder Kürten was a man of cruelty, both physical and emotional. He would beat his children mercilessly for the smallest infractions. But the real horror was the abuse he inflicted on his wife. Peter grew up watching his father repeatedly beat his mother, often in full view of the children, and the abuse didn't stop there. It's believed that his father also subjected the children to horrific SA. Peter Kürten's father was not just a disciplinarian, he was a tyrant whose cruelty transcended mere physical abuse. The beatings Peter and his siblings endured were relentless. They came without warning, often triggered by the smallest perceived slight, a spilled cup of water or a misstep in their chores. For Peter, the sound of his father's heavy boots on the floorboards was enough to send shivers down his spine, knowing what might follow. But it wasn't just physical punishment. His father wielded humiliation as a weapon, turning their home into a theatre of public shame. He would berate Peter's mother in front of the children, using vile language that no child should hear, breaking her spirit in full view of her family. To make matters worse, the children often became unwilling witnesses to their father's outbursts with nowhere to hide in the cramped apartment. Peter would later describe these moments as some of the most formative and traumatic of his young life. One of the cruelest aspects of Peter's father's abuse was his complete disregard for his children's emotional well-being. He was a man who took no interest in nurturing or guiding his offspring. Instead, he used them as outlets for his frustration and rage. There was no affection, no comfort, no safe place to turn. For Peter, the idea of family became synonymous with pain and fear. The scars of his father's treatment weren't just physical. They ran deep into Peter's psyche. It's one thing to endure hardship, but to live in an environment where cruelty is the norm, where love and kindness are foreign concepts, it twists something inside. Peter's understanding of relationships and power dynamics was shaped in this crucible of violence, setting the stage for the darkness that would later consume him. Experts often talk about how early childhood experiences shape our personalities. In Peter's case, his father's monstrous behaviour seemed to plant the seeds of something darker. The cycle of abuse and dehumanisation that he experienced at home would become a blueprint for his later atrocities. But let's take a moment to consider the complexity of this environment. Peter wasn't just a passive victim. Like many children in abusive households, he adapted. He learned to navigate the constant danger, to read his father's moods, and to suppress his own emotions. In a way, Peter's childhood was a crash course in survival, but at a terrible cost. By the time Peter was a young boy, he'd already developed a deep hatred for his father. But home wasn't his only exposure to violence. Growing up in the working-class slums of Mülheim, Peter quickly learned that the world outside wasn't much kinder. He took to the streets, escaping the horrors of his home, but finding little solace in the rough and tumble environment of urban poverty. The streets were a different kind of school, one where Peter learned new lessons: how to steal, how to lie, and how to fight. But there was something else he learned, something far darker. It was on the streets that Peter befriended a local dog catcher. At first, this might seem like an innocent connection, a lonely boy seeking companionship and finding it in an adult mentor. But this man was no mentor. He introduced Peter to acts of cruelty that would haunt him and excite him. The dog catcher showed Peter how to torture and kill animals. For most of us, the very thought of harming a helpless creature is revolting. But for Peter, this was something different, something awakening. The thrill of control, the power of inflicting pain. These feelings took root in his young mind. By his early teens, Peter was committing petty crimes, theft, vandalism, you name it. But these weren't just the rebellious acts of a troubled youth. There was a darker edge to Peter's actions. He wasn't just stealing for survival, he seemed to enjoy the chaos his actions caused. And then there were the fires. Peter had a fascination with flames. At the age of 16, he set fire to a barn. Watching the flames consume the building, he reportedly felt a strange sense of satisfaction. But it didn't stop there. He would go on to set more fires, always watching from the shadows as chaos unfolded. For Peter, arson wasn't just a crime. It was an expression of his inner turmoil, a way to channel his growing need for destruction. As his criminal behaviour escalated, Peter also began to experiment with violence. He targeted weaker children, bullying and tormenting them in ways that mirrored the abuse he suffered at home. In these early acts, we see a chilling pattern emerge. Peter wasn't just a victim, he was becoming a predator. In his late teenage years, Peter began taking his criminal behaviour to more disturbing and alarming levels. He committed numerous essays, targeting young girls in his neighbourhood. These attacks were shocking in their brutality, even for the rough streets of Mülheim. And yet, Peter managed to evade serious consequences. But it wasn't just the crimes themselves that were alarming. It was Peter's growing sense of control and his ability to manipulate others. He had a knack for blending into the background, for appearing ordinary. This skill would serve him well in the years to come, as he evolved from a troubled youth into a full-fledged predator. It's worth noting that Peter's crimes during this period weren't just about satisfying some dark urge. They were also about power. For a boy who had grown up powerless, inflicting pain on others gave him a sense of control that he had never experienced before. By the time Peter Kürten reached adulthood, the foundation for his monstrous future was already firmly in place. The violence of his childhood, the cruelty he inflicted on animals, the petty crimes, the fires, all of it was building towards something far more sinister. As an adult, and as Peter's life unfolded, his crimes grew more calculated and sinister. By the late 1920s, he had moved to Düsseldorf, where he would begin the spree of murders that earned him his infamous nickname. Kürten's methods were as varied as they were chilling. Unlike many criminals of his time, he didn't adhere to a single pattern. This unpredictability made him especially dangerous. His victims came from all walks of life: men, women, children. No one was safe. What's more, Peter had a disturbing knack for evading capture. He could blend into crowds, adopting a calm and collected demeanour that betrayed none of his inner darkness. He would often strike at random, choosing victims who happened to cross his path. In one particularly chilling instance, he lured a young girl into the woods under the pretense of helping her find her way home. What began as an act of kindness quickly turned into something far more sinister. This calculated duplicity, presenting himself as helpful before revealing his true intentions, was a hallmark of Kürten's crimes. What set Kürten apart wasn't just the scale of his crimes, but the psychological games he played. During his spree, he sent taunting letters to the police, detailing his crimes in a way that both horrified and mystified them. It was as if he wanted the world to know about his deeds, yet he revelled in the chaos of remaining unidentified. The city of Düsseldorf lived in fear, with newspapers dubbing him the Vampire of Düsseldorf. The name came not just from the brutal nature of his crimes, but also from the twisted rumours surrounding his methods. Each new headline stoked public fear, and Kürten seemed to enjoy every moment of it. But that's another story. In hindsight, the warning signs were everywhere. The broken home, the early fascination with cruelty, the escalating acts of violence. But for those around Peter, these signs were easy to miss. After all, as a child, he wasn't a monster yet. He was just a troubled boy, one of many in a city teeming with hardship. In many ways, Peter Kürten was a product of his environment, but his story also forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions. How much of what we become is shaped by the world around us? And how much is born from something darker within? Thank you for joining us as we uncovered the dark and haunting early life of Peter Kürten. Stories like these remind us of the delicate balance between nature and nurture, and how the scars of childhood can shape the monsters of tomorrow. If you found this story compelling, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth documentaries just like this. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think played the biggest role in shaping Peter Kürten's future? Drop a comment below and let us know. Your support helps us keep exploring these complex and chilling tales. And remember, behind every monster lies a story. Until next time.